everybody, and welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope you're doing well. Today we're doing a box office breakdown for this past weekend, which saw the new film Challengers, featuring Zendaya in what has been a very weird release as far as just the marketing of this movie. I remember seeing this image leaked a long time ago, going back even so far as whenever the last time Tom Holland was in a Spider-Man movie, it seems. There was a lot of just, again, buzz around the fact that Zendaya is making out with two different people, and oh man, just go ahead and look at all of this angst and everything, and all I saw was, wow, yeah, Hollywood continues to be depraved and continues to just be simply disgusting and lacking any sense of modesty or morality. Again, that's just where my mind tends to go with these things. The movie, though, making $15 million, and Tony, of course, over at Deadline, having to continue to just, Tony's going to be Tony, have to try to say, it's the biggest opening, and then he specifies, right, the biggest opening to Luca Guadagnino. So it's the biggest opening for this one individual person. Yeah, way to write a headline there, Tony. So we'll talk about that. We also had a new release for a film called Unsung Hero, which is a new, I think, just, again, faith-based or faith-inspired movie coming out, and it's always nice to see these movies be able to bring at least some balance, or perceivingly, bring some perceptible balance to kind of the nonsense of Hollywood film and releases like Challengers. We also have some updates on other films, including the fact that Godzilla x Kong, we can finally say, at least according to all of the numbers that are currently available to us, that the film has broken even, has actually made some profit now. It is in that positive territory, so good for you getting all the way there. Doesn't make the Monsterverse any better, and I know a lot of people have been unsubscribing because of my realistic criticism of the Monsterverse, and all I can say is, well, sorry, not sorry. I'm not going to apologize or stop just because people unsubscribe to the channel. That's not why I'm here. I do this because it's fun and because I enjoy diving into the numbers. And so if you don't like them, guess what? You have the complete power and capacity and ability and free will to go elsewhere. But I cannot promise you that those other people will be as honest and upfront with you about these numbers and about what is going on in the scheme of the media and especially the box office. And so if you want to have that, hey, please go ahead and stick around. Also, make sure you smash that like button, light up that fire button over on Odyssey, and smash the rumble button as well. Also, make sure that you are subscribed to the channel with that bell notification. That way you know every time a video or live stream goes live on the channel, especially because notifications tend to be really bad, not just with videos, but especially with live streams. I still do live stream every single Tuesday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time. I do that every single week. You are more than welcome to join on those streams where we continue to talk about box office and other movie news. But of course, this week it is all about Challengers getting a $15 million opening. Oh man, best Zendaya live action non-IP pick as well. This is how far they are having to dig. This is how desperate Tony is to create a headline. Is basically to say it's the biggest opening of this individual director-producer's career, and it's the best opening ever for Zendaya if we look at live-action non-IP films. That says literally nothing. I award you no points. Good sir. It goes on. Amazon MGM Studios Challengers is being called at $15 million opening, which is officially the biggest opening ever for Oscar-nominated filmmaker Luca Guadagnino. It's also the best we've seen from Zendaya for a live-action original non-IP movie. That is a lot of factors there to get to your record, quote-unquote record. Friday previews at 6.2 million. Saturday was at 5 million, 19% down. The studio has the confidence Sunday will come in at 3.78. Before this, the widest release for him was his Timothy Chalamet Cannibal Romance, Bones and All. No one loves movies with cannibalism more than modern audiences, which went over Thanksgiving weekend. Very appropriate. Cannibal movie over Thanksgiving? Those two just seem to go hand in glove. And 2.2 million over 3 days, 3.6 million over 5 days, and the finale of 7.8 million back in 2022. Not counting Spider-Mans or Dunes or anything animated, Challengers notches ahead of the 8.8 million 2017 Christmas weekend opening of The Greatest Showman, with Zendaya starring in, but was largely sold off of Hugh Jackman. And here's where I'm going to again call out Tony, because I love doing that. So notice he's saying back all the way in 2017, 8.8 million. So we all know Tony will not adjust for things like inflation. And even if inflation gets you triggered, he's definitely not also going to make a comparison of the actual ticket sales, because let's just be frank, even if you're going to ignore right? The fact that inflation is a thing and it's completely a fair metric in comparing movies between now and previous years. At the very least, you'd have to say, well, remember, back 2017, ticket prices were probably closer to what, $8 or $9 a ticket? Somewhere in that ballpark, maybe even a little bit less. Nowadays, they're closer to the 13 to 14 on average here domestically. So if you're going to try to make that argument, you have to remember, yeah, but Greatest Showman still would have had more people in the actual theater. That is a much important metric, right? Because that means more people still went to go see Greatest Showman than they did Challengers. And it makes sense. Challengers comes across as much more of an Oscar bait type movie. Maybe be able to bring in some people that are not that typical crowd because if you have people like Zendaya in the film, because you do have, again, that huge part of that marketing push being just showing this sexual depravity on screen. Again, that's going to drive some people out to go and see a movie. But all in all, you are just, again, really scraping the bottom of the barrel to try to make any of these points. What happens now in the cruel summer box office that might not hit $3 billion this coming weekend? It's Universal's The Fall Guy, starring Emily Blunt and Ryan Gosling. If it's lucky, after a South by Southwest world premiere over a month ago, it will hit $40 million. And the expectation is that movie will hold and pull in women thanks to post-Barbie Gosling Ken. Could also be the fact that, yes, that is going to be a part of it, and it's interesting that they go in that direction when most of the time you hear people argue that, well, action movies tend to favor more male demographic audiences, right? So they, again, pick and choose when they decide to hold to certain standards or not. Personally, I think Fall Guy will do pretty well. It just seems like one of the only films coming out over the next month that has a lot of people excited. Maybe Planet of the Apes, right? The next Planet of the Apes film. But Fall Guy is one that I think has the most people across the, interest spectrum, across the genre spectrum interested because, yeah, ultimately it's not just the women who are going to be drawn to want to see a film with Ryan Gosling. And again, I doubt it's going to be because of Barbie specifically. Women just maybe really like Ryan Gosling. And again, more so, maybe have more women show up because more men are showing up and they are bringing along their dates saying, well, hey, why might as well come along because you're going to see the film with Ryan Gosling in it. Don't you want to see him? Again, one thing to note there. Now, he then mentions things like Cinema Score, which are complete garbage and have no actual metric and basis and don't actually release the full data on anything. So you have to take their word with a giant grain of salt. And I will continue not to do so. We have, of course, also Nance at Deadline. Again, to just top tier people over at Deadline, saying Skadoosh, Kung Fu Panda 4 crosses 500 million worldwide, challenges widens offshore net, Fall Guy starts overseas action, so getting an early start there for the Fall Guy, so that could have an impact on overall projections, but we'll see just how much money it makes in those places and how wide of a release it actually is early. If it's only in a few screens in the UK or somewhere like that, that won't make much of a dent. But again, we'll have to wait and see there. As far as Kung Fu Panda, again, that seems like a pretty good number. And it is, right? They spent a lot less money on this movie. And so it's bringing in a lot more profits this time around, maybe even compared to some of the previous films in the franchise. The issue is, again, this film is still not getting anywhere close to the heights of those other films when you adjust for things like inflation, or at the very least into raw ticket sales. A lot less people still going to see these movies than in previous years. Going over to thenumbers.com because we love looking at thenumbers.com because unlike Box Office Pro, which has just become a complete and utter trash fire, they have not been doing their weekly predictions charting, and it was one of the better chartings out there, not just because necessarily they were accurate, but because it was a good thing to just look at versus just the walls of text that you tend to get from places like Deadline, etc. Maybe we need to start picking that up over at geeksandgamers.com. I don't know. Would love to be able to find out information early as far as what the industry is projecting on things, because typically I can only get access to that from what people at Tony a Deadline are getting to because they get that access. So maybe we need to start to actually become that place where people go to. We'll have to, of course, look into that further. I like to speak my mind on things when I can because, hey, this is ADD-driven show. Challenges, though, got the number one spot at $15 million, 3.4 thousand screens. I don't know why I said it that way. $4,000 per screen. So, again, not really all that impressive, especially since this film costs around $55 million to make. That is going to be a bit of a challenge, right? When you look at the typical marketing costs attached to even these lower-budgeted movies, or mid-budget movies, we could say, for a movie like this, you still need to make quite a bit of money to make your money back because of the splits between studios and theaters. Unsung Hero from Lionsgate, or at least being distributed by Lionsgate, but from the same minds of previous faith-based movies, doing relatively well here, $7.7 million, around $2,000, $2,700 a screen. Godzilla X Kong is getting in the number 3 spot once again. Again, this is a movie that I think some people who are huge fans of the MonsterVerse were expecting to, dominate down the stretch. And while its holds have been pretty good, right, a 25% hold in its 5th week is still very, very good. And it has now reached the point of reaching profitability when you look at the raw numbers as far as what we have right now and what the typical standards are. I've talked about this at length, especially in my articles at geeksandgamers.com. And so if you want to find out more about why I'm saying now is when it's breaking even, go check out the last couple weeks of articles that I've written over there with the box office breakdowns, because I go into more detail on, again, what we've been told as far as the breakdown of studio versus theater, especially with the whole China dynamic and having a Chinese-owned or influenced company in the mix. We go into all of that, but again, the fact that it is not nearly as high as what it possibly could be, this movie, again, it's returned to form, as I've said. There's no denying the fact that this is a much better result than the last 2 MonsterVerse films, but it's still not going to get close to the heights of even Godzilla 2014 or going especially all the way back if you look to the numbers for Kong Skull Island. That is just currently where we are with that film. The movie Civil War opened again to that number 1 spot, held on to that number 1 spot last weekend, and has now dropped to the number 4 spot. So this film also holding on quite well, 38% hold here after having, again, a pretty decent hold last week. The film just ultimately cost a little bit too much to make, and so it's not looking like the film will make its money back, but it's definitely in a much better position. And again, never say never with these things, but it's holding very well. We'll see what happens when you have a, I guess arguably the next big release, which will be Fall Guy. But if right now they're projecting, at least Tony is, around the $40 million range, maybe a little bit higher, probably not going to have a very high weekend next weekend. I don't think Civil War will be much different from that either. The new film Abigail that came out last weekend dropped to the number 5 spot, dropping 49% for a horror film. This movie, I think, just cost a little bit too much money, because right now we're projecting the film probably will end up losing money when everything is said and done. The same also to be said for The Ministry of Ungenly Warfare. Second week of release, only dropping 57% still for a film that did not, that cost as much as it did and had as low of an opening weekend as it did. A 57% drop is not a very good one, and right now, especially because of the budget behind the film and the fact that they're not going to release it in a lot of other places internationally and are getting very close to getting it on a PVOD release, right, a streaming release, means that this film pretty much is not going to make any money and is going to be a pretty massive flop to boot. All of those reasons as to why it's flopping, not for the reasons that some people are trying to still make a thing. Please stop trying to say it's all because of Alan Ritchson's comments. Again, that could have influenced some people, but to say that that's the prime reason, or it's even a major reason that it's not doing well, is just not based in reality. Please stop. Anyway, going to Kung Fu Panda 4, still hanging around after 8 weeks of release. So again, very impressive to see that. Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, even though these long, down the stretch, holds have been decent percentage-wise, it just did not really make a whole lot of money up front and is still not looking all that impressive in comparison to the other films. And again, also based off of its budget. Dune Part 2 started making profit a little while ago. After 9 weeks of release, it is still doing well there. And also a new film from Roadside Attractions that I've heard some good things about, but again, taking it with a grain of salt, haven't heard too many people talk about it yet. But Boy Kills World, 1.6 million, getting a limited release at over only 1,900 screens. So again, that's large enough to make a little bit more of a splash. I think ultimately the marketing is probably why this film is not doing as well. I just haven't seen any promotion for it whatsoever. Going worldwide, Challengers at $25 million. Again, that seems okay, but the fact that it has a $55 million budget means right now it's only made 0.5 times its budget, and I doubt the film will see that much more down the stretch. Unsung Hero at $7.7 million. This film only costing $6 million, 1.3 times its budget at this point in time. Again, a much better position to make its money back in the long run. Godzilla X Kong, the fact that because of where it's making its money, just to show you how important this is, right? Most of the time, break-even points have always been somewhere between 2.5 and 3. When you have films, though, like Godzilla, or for like these places that are these movies being made by companies like Legendary, where there's all this money being put into it, a lot less for this one compared to others, because though it's making most of its money internationally, and especially in China, it means that it has to make a lot more down the stretch because it gets so much less from those markets typically. And so 3.8 times the budget is the reason why we're looking and saying, okay, it had to make about that much money, almost 3.5 probably roughly, to hit its break-even point. Shows you why it's very important to do well, not only right in your total box office, but Also, why that domestic number matters, because you get a much stronger return on investment there. We got Civil War at $67 million, still has a ways to go. Abigail, again, heard some pretty decent things about it. Doesn't seem to be making that much of a splash as far as just raw numbers are concerned. So not looking great. They spent a little bit more on that than they probably should have. Ministry of Ungentlemy Warfare doing, again, not too well. Kung Fu Panda 4 doing great, but again, based off of its budgets and previous films, still not close to what it had been initially. Ghostbusters at $187 million. Again, $200 million is definitely in the cards, but that's not saying much when you compare it to some of the other movies. Dune Part 2 at $704 million. Again, pretty much on pace to, as I mentioned, end in the $700 to $800 million range. It's looking like that is going to be a guarantee at this point. And then Bill Skarsgård's starring in this movie, Boy Kills World, from the producers of Evil Dead and Barbarian. Take that for what it is. Whenever they say, from the same producers of... You're like, okay, I don't know what you're trying to exactly say there, but little marketing for this movie might keep it from doing much of anything. But again, that's the reason why, if you're wondering why it's not on my chart, why that is the case. And speaking of charts, we love charts here on OMB Reviews, and so we can now make some projections for Abigail. So Abigail, because of its second weekend numbers being 28.6 million, we're projecting it to be probably ending somewhere between $40 and $57 million based off of typical historical trends. Again, I've crunched this math before. If you want to see more about my methodology, check out some of my founding articles on geeksandgamers.com. Every box office update I do over on Geeks and Gamers, I have links at the bottom to get you to those initial stories, so that way you can find, okay, how do I work out my methodology? How do I justify the numbers and the projections that I make? And you can get more information there. That way I don't have to explain that full process every single video. So anyway, $40 million right now is the minimum. I'm thinking $57 million at max. The film did cost $28 million, so that's probably a little bit more than what they should have. So I'm projecting the film to end somewhere around $17 million in the red to $7 million in the red. So probably enough for it to make its money back down the stretch, maybe on streaming or something similar to that. But is definitely not in as good of a position as what these films tend to be, right? When you have a typically lower budgeted horror film, I think it is connected to the Blumhouses. I think, maybe. Usually expect a little bit more here, but again, not making enough at this point. Could be able to do something down the stretch. We've seen it happen before, but as of right now, the numbers that we're seeing, nothing that impressive is happening with it. Speaking of not impressive, the Ministry of Ungentlemy Warfare, right? It doesn't matter what you think the reason is, right? The only truth I can tell you is that it's not just because of Alan Ritchson, or it's not even primarily because of him, because if you follow anything about Guy Ritchie movies, if you follow anything about what this movie is objectively speaking, it's a mediocre film, right? And this is speaking of someone that is not saying that at all because of Alan Ritchson. I can separate art from the artist, and I'm looking at the movie as a movie itself, and it's just okay. It's fine. And that's what the numbers are reflecting at the box office. We've seen this happen even the last couple of films he's had over the last couple of years. Looking at you, Operation Fortune. Looking also at the drops for the other film that he did, Guy Ritchie's The Covenant, which this film actually made more than in its opening. Comparatively. So right now, though, this film, based off of what we have right now, probably will lose somewhere between $76 and $70 million by the end of its run. Again, when you have a $60 million budget, and they definitely put in typical marketing costs for this movie based off of the marketing that was seen, probably going to still need to make quite a bit more, and I don't think that's going to happen. Some of the charts not updating because the numbers.com is not for some reason feeding the data over, but those are those numbers. Over at Random Crazy Charting, I did finally update the Godzilla X Kong, so again, just so y'all can see those numbers, right? 181 million domestic, 55% cut you get typically between studios and the theaters. Internationally, without China, is at $211.8 million. China at $125.9. And so if we go based off of the typical trends, the typical amounts, and again, you can try to argue or try to bring up saying, well, they actually get more because of how Wanda Group owns Legendary, and that means that the Chinese influence is there. Again, I've talked about this at length, and my articles at Geeks and Gamers go further into it as well. We just don't have confirmation on exactly how much money is received because of this new deal, if there even is one, between the two parties. And so therefore, all we can go by is the standard, which means based on these numbers, 25% returns from China, 40% returns internationally, 55% roughly returns domestically by the end of the run. It means right now it's made around $13 million in profit, which still doesn't quite make up for the amount of money lost at the box office. So again, don't bring up ancillary things like, international releases and streaming service stuff, right? Because a lot of this stuff is typically in home. All we know is based off of the actual numbers at the box office. As a box office movie, the movies have just not been able to do much of anything. This is going to be on paper one of the more successful, one of the more profitable movies. But remember, even that first Godzilla 2014, that $1.7 million in profit, you have to adjust that for inflation. And so that means that that's going to be, again, probably somewhat similar to what we had for Godzilla X Kong. If I had to guess, I would say I totally could see Godzilla X Kong because it costs a lot less, making more net profits by the end of the run versus 2014's Godzilla. But even so, if you look at this, the total overall box office, that film ended at $328 million internationally. There was no China release or no China data from that first Godzilla film. $211 million right now domestically or internationally without China. $125 million with China. So again, you can see why. Again, I look at these numbers and I think, okay, not really in the same ballpark, especially when you realize that these are unadjusted numbers. And so those are currently, though, the numbers as they stand. What are y'all's thoughts? Have you seen Challengers? Have you seen Unsung Hero? What are your thoughts about any of the other films mentioned? Was there a film on these top lists, right? The top part of this list that I didn't mention? Let me know that as well. Interesting to see, since I just saw these here, right? You had some re-releases of older films like Alien from 20th Century, right? $1.5 million there. $893 a screen, so doing better than some other newer releases. For sure. You also have The Mummy's new re-release as well, doing okay at the at the very limited release for that. Shrek 2 got a re-release, it looked like, and I know that there's some others that are either re-released or in the process of being re-released. I know that Spider-Man 2, for instance, was out recently, and again, those are doing well. But that's also what happens when you've got really nothing coming out, especially nothing new at the overall box office. So if you want further analysis on any of this, go check me out over at geeksandgamers.com, where I have an article every single week about the box office. I also have a bonus article this past week talking about how, yes, indeed, Ant-Man and the Wasp cost $330 million, meaning the net cost after you take into account the UK tax credit was $275 million, which means ultimately, yeah, Ant-Man lost them $200 million by itself. We're talking about hundreds upon hundreds of millions of dollars lost for Disney, lost for Marvel in a very short amount of time. And so if you want more analysis on that, go check that out at geeksandgamers.com. If you like this video, smash that like button, light up that fire button over on Odyssey, and smash the rumble button as well. You guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Have a wonderful rest of your day, a blessed Easter, and as always, God bless. And now for a special shout out to all of my April Chosen of Valhalla members, starting off first with those members over on Patreon: Father Luca Illich, Rosetta Allen, check out her YouTube channel as Eagle Rider, and Miss Martin Muses, check out her YouTube channel by the same name as well. To my Subscribe Star members, we have Matt317, check out his Twitch channel by the same name, and ZK-Man, check out his channel xtheboundaries.ceo. That's where you can find his website and his other social media platforms. And also a huge shout out to my one YouTube Chosen of Valhalla member, Mr. Roy. Always awesome. Every single member of my Chosen is amazing. And if you want your name shouted out at the end of every live stream video or listed, access to a podcast, access also to a giveaways channel that I host over on my Discord server, or any of these other things that are offered, check out the top link in the video description below and become a member today. You guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Have a wonderful rest of your day, a blessed Easter, and as always, God bless.